VA workshop event on quality, VA standing for voluntary adoption, and you're all here and giving up your time, which we're very grateful for, because this idea of adopting the code of practice as a way of guiding your organization's research and kind of analytical outputs is something that you're really keen on either doing or learning more about. And those of you who've done it, I'm sure, will have lots of experiences to share with people here who may be well, let's put it this way, less far down the journey. And colleagues from OSR will be staggered to hear me use the J word, because I'm famous for saying too many people are always on a journey. So I ban the phrase journey, but I've given myself special dispensation today to use the J word. So this is about voluntary adoption, using the code of practice to guide and support your outputs. The main theme of today is going to be all about quality. That's how using the code can really help give assurance and improve quality. And we have a whole range of presentations all about that. But to guide us through the day, I'm going to ask Suzanne to talk through the agenda and then introduce each session. So Suzanne, do you want to take it from there? And you're not allowed to say journey.
Morning, everybody. Well, I'm really glad we're together again for another VA workshop. We've got some really exciting presentations. Just to say, we are recording the session today for people that might be unable to attend. Also, we have the chat box. We do have sort of Q&A built into the day, but I think, let's use the chat box. We can sort of ask questions as we go to capture them as we're thinking of them. And we are thinking about quality today as a really important factor. Penny will draw on that more later. But I think, quality is a pillar of the code that is vitally important, but doesn't always get quite as much limelight as elements like trustworthiness. So we've got a really interesting presentation from Tim Burrell to start off with. He was one of our first very early VA adopters for his Financial Lives survey. And then we have a presentation from Antaska from ONS, who is from the population and public policy area. Then we're going to have Q&A, something from Penny on quality, and then a presentation from James Tucker on the Data Quality Hub. So Tim, if you're ready.
I am ready.
Fantastic.
I think I am. I'll sort out my tech.
There you are.
I can hopefully share the screen with you. Let me know when you can see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And is that full screen? So you can see everything.
Yeah,
I'll take it. Take it.
Yeah, it looks quite big. Yeah.
Good. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along to talk about our Financial Lives survey. So we've just published our report actually in April, so it's quite timely to have this discussion. And as Suzanne said, we first got in touch with the OSR via the ONS in 2017. It may even have been before then, because we published our first report around then, and it was largely because we were planning this big survey, and I'll talk a bit more about it and share some of the findings in a second. And we really wanted it to be of the best quality that it could possibly be, and to get the sort of the best recognition that we could get around it being the best. And when I talk later on about the benefits of adopting it, I talk very much about it being a respected data source, both internally and with the industry as well, and with other government departments as well. So that's really what we were striving for when we set out on this not journey but project. And I think as well it's worth saying our intention at the time was to start off with the Financial Lives survey and then adopt it for other projects as well. That hasn't really kicked off for us, and there's a number of reasons for that. The last year is one of them, with everyone being so busy on other things, but it does remain an intention of ours, both for our research surveys, but also for our regulatory data collections as well. So we publish things like complaints data that we get from the industry. So there's really lots of opportunities for us to make more of this. And I think it disappointing from a personal perspective, but it just hasn't been possible. But it is something that remains on our radar. So what I'll do, I'll talk a little bit about the Financial Lives Survey, and I'll go through some of the findings, and then talk about what we get from the voluntary adoption. So what is Financial Lives? It's our flagship survey of consumers. It's a big consumer survey. We do it every 2 years. So we first did it in 2017. We ran it again in 2019-20, but we actually finished data collection in February 2020, and then everything changed. It didn't really make sense for us to produce a report in the middle of last year when everything was all up in the air and everything was changing. So we ended up doing a follow-up survey in October, which was then we could report on the impacts of COVID. So it's a really big survey. We do online and face-to-face interviewing when face-to-face was available. We had to do some telephone interviews for the follow-up survey because we couldn't do face-to-face. But we employed statistical consultants to make sure that we get the most representative and best methodology that we could possibly get for the best value for money as well. But we put an awful lot of effort into making it representative. We have a lot of issues in financial services. I'm sure that it's not just in financial services, but things around digital exclusion, reaching the older generations, and we put in a lot of effort to reach those people. So we know that we can't just do online. So we had to do the face-to-face element as well. And when I say we did online, it was push to web. So we did a completely random sample of letters to contact people and ask them to conduct it over the internet. So we think it's a really, we think, top class survey, really representative. And just to go through, I've only got a few findings because I think that they are interesting and they're really quite topical as well. And I think as well, it's a good example of where our findings are hopefully making a difference. But one of the things we measure is characteristics of vulnerability. And we've recently released a consultation paper to the industry around how financial firms should be treating people that are vulnerable. And I'll talk a little bit in a second around what it means to be vulnerable. But what we can see is that the change between 2017 and 2020 was that there were less people becoming or being vulnerable, but then that's changed between February and October 2020. So the second lot of this research was carried out in October 2020, which was just before the next lockdown. So looking at the types of people that were becoming more vulnerable, the people that were impacted by the pandemic the most, so people in self-employment, Black and ethnic minority groups, and younger adults. I've highlighted the detailed base information there because I think that's one thing that we did get from it was encouraged by the code in terms of quality around how we reference our stats, particularly externally. So in some cases it might be a bit over the top, and you'll see it in a couple of slides time. We put a lot of information in the base so that people know exactly what we're reporting, and that is important. So in terms of how vulnerability has changed, the big differences between February and October was around life events and resilience. So what I mean around life events are things like being put on furlough, losing your job. So understandably, there's big changes there. And the other one is around financial resilience. This is a big thing for us, and that's people's ability to cope with financial shocks, and that might be losing your job. So there was a big increase in people with low financial resilience. And looking at that over time, it wasn't just a one-way move. So there were some people that were becoming less financial or more financially resilient, if you like. and having this quality of data was really important when we were making policy decisions. So things like payment deferrals in the mortgage and credit market all draw on this research, and being able to back it up, knowing that it is sort of best in class that we could hope for, really gives it weight when we're making these decisions, both in our discussions with consumer groups, when we're publishing things to the public, and having discussions with other government departments to set policy. So that was the financial resilience, and then a final slide of findings, which again shows that not everybody's been worse off. And there's an example at the bottom there around the detailed base information that I talked about. And we think this is really important so that our figures aren't misquoted, but also so that people know exactly what we're talking about, and if they want to reuse the figures, because they can. So that was just a real whistle-top tour of a few findings, and this is a side of what it really means to us. I mean, the FCA is consumer-focused and we're data-led, and this is a fantastic source of insight for us, and it's so important that it is well respected, and people use it as the go-to piece of information. There are a lot of firms, a lot of very good firms producing research, doing good data, but it's important for the industry to talk in a common language as well. So if we're talking about particular products, we're talking about particular types of people, we can use this survey as a benchmark, and it's recognised by ourselves, by industry, by government as the go-to place for information. As I mentioned earlier, we've already used this data in our key priorities, so things like payment deferrals, also where we've not made policy changes, so where we've decided that actually a change isn't necessary. We've used this data to back up where we're not making changes. And it's not just all COVID related things. I've talked about vulnerability, but all sorts of policy changes that we're making. This is the go-to source of data. As I say, it shaped our ongoing response to the pandemic. I'll go on to the next slide to talk about how we've circulated our findings. So we've got the report, which was on the very first slide that I showed, and this is a cutout from our web page. But you can see that where we advertise the code of practice for statistics, we also put it on our documentation for consumers, so advanced letters on our website for the privacy notice, which you can see below that. One of the things which is a bit difficult, and I'd be really interested if anybody has any ideas, but is evaluating the impact. One of the things that we are trying to put a lot more effort into is evaluating the impact of our statistics, and I think amongst that is kind of evaluating what impact something like signing up to the code has. I think that's a really difficult thing to do, but we are trying to put a lot of effort in as an organisation to evaluate not just our policy measures, but the research that we do and the impact that it has. And that's something that's in the voluntary adoption that we're taking on. But what this slide also shows is some of the associated documents that we publish alongside the report. So we've got the technical report that is incredibly detailed, and yeah, it's really not light reading. But we feel that it's really important to be completely open with how we've carried out the survey, how we've contacted people. We published the questionnaire. We've got our resources library there. And within that, we've got all the weighted data tables, an awful lot of information. So we're putting it open to the industry, to consumer groups. They can all go away and use the tables. We don't just leave it to their devices. They can come through to us and we can help. And we've also recently published the raw data as well with the Consumer Data Research Centre. So in terms of the voluntary adoption, I think it's fair to say that a lot of it is just really, really good practice, and a lot of it we would be doing anyway as an organisation, but it really does keep us on our toes and keep us reminded of what we should be doing throughout the entire project life cycle. So when we're developing, keeping in mind that we are asking the right things, that the stuff that needs to be in there, that we're not just collecting data for the sake of it. In terms of our field work, how we notify people, how we've contacted them, the privacy notices we put together, throughout our analysis, making sure that we're working with the right people, that we're carrying out good analysis, and we're reporting it and making everything available. And I've also put in their procurement as well. And that's important, that we're working with the right people and that we're getting value for money. And I mentioned earlier, we work with a statistical consultant to make sure that our weighting's right, because we can also use this survey as a weighting mechanism for future surveys. So we have carried out other research and we weight back to it as well. So that's another reason why it's important that we have good quality. And that was it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That is absolutely fascinating. What interesting insights into last year and the work you've been doing. Atanaska, are you ready to continue with your presentation?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, thank you.
I will share screen, hopefully. Okay. Let me know if you can see the slide.
We can.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I will talk to you a bit about a project that is related to the Sustainable Development Goals, where we, together with the Data Science Campus, there was some work done in order to fill in information for one of these indicators, which then went through the voluntary application process. So just to talk to you quickly through that, about the experience of that and what the data is about. Without going into any of the technical details, there is a published QMI that can be followed up for more detail. And then I will also talk to you about a currently ongoing project about protocol for assessment of non-official sources, where we are using the code of practice as a reference in order to help us with the quality for that. Okay, so the Sustainable Development Goals, I don't know, maybe some of you are familiar with them, but it's a UN initiative, the United Nations, and the UK is officially signed up to it, and there are 17 goals altogether with targets beneath them, and then loads of indicators towards those, 247 to be exact. And the idea is that these 17 goals cover different aspects of society, economy and environment. And by 2030, there are certain, these targets need to be ideally achieved. And it's a global project. So around the world, countries have signed up. And as one of the countries that have signed up to it, we need to report our progress towards each of these indicators. So that's as far as I'm going to say about that, but there's lots of information to follow up. So within goal 6, then the target that I'm going to talk about is, whoops, I can't change slides. There we go. I went a bit too ahead of, there we go. So I'm going to talk about the project relating to indicator 661. So that would be goal 6, target 6.6, and indicator 661. That's how the hierarchy goes. So this relates to clean water and sanitation, goal 6. And this particular SDG indicator is about change in extent of water-related ecosystems over time. So that's quite a complicated indicator because it has a lot of sub-indicators to report against. And originally this was a data gap. We didn't have any obvious source to fill this according to the UN specification, because the UN releases metadata document towards each of these indicators where they actually specify internationally comparable methodology according to which each country is supposed to fill in their progress towards the indicator. So ideally we want to fill in to show our progress with methodology that matches what the UN requires. So there actually has been a project within the United Nations Environmental Programme and the Joint Research Center, Google, in order to create a tool using satellite imagery called the Global Surface Water Explorer. And this tool was designed specifically to help countries fill in this indicator, 661. So in a way, the tool is already available there. So we can just go in and take the data for the UK relating to spatial extent of water-related ecosystems and use it in order to report the UK's progress on our platform. But we actually did some validation towards that in order to make sure that this global tool, which is designed for the world, is actually good enough for the UK context and what the indicator exactly requires. And this is where this project started together with the Data Science Campus. It's a non-official data source, obviously, and this was mainly for the validation purposes of it. So as I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail because, well, actually I wasn't even involved with the project, but at the time. The idea is that there is this very detailed map of the world where you can trace water bodies and the change over time for them. But what was found, what we have basically is an equivalent, what we could have used if this was not available, is the Ordnance Survey map, but there are some issues with it as it's quite static, so changes over time can't really be reported, and that's the key thing that we're looking for this indicator. Whereas the Global Surface Water Explorer data doesn't have this problem. It provides time series, so you can see the changes over time, but it has other limitations, such as it's based on pixels, so it's lower quality. You can see the map on the right, that's the Global Surface Water Explorer, and on the left is the Ordnance Survey for the UK, which is a lot more detailed, and it captures smaller water bodies. So that was used for validation purposes for the Global Surface Water Explorer. And in short, by using that, the global data was mapped so that, because if we just used it as it is, the problem was that narrow water and water around the shoreline wasn't being picked up specifically, which ends up in not having the right boundaries for the UK. But by validating it with the Ordnance Survey and mapping the edges so that they match the specific UK boundaries, the quality of that was improved. Of course, it still has the limitations of the resolution, but given the fact that we can construct time series from it, it's much better. So this leads to divergence from the international figures compared to what we end up reporting on the platform by using this validated data. But the data that we report on the platform is compliant with the UK Code of Practice, and this is what basically the project was about, taking that global data, validating it against sources that we've got, and then going through the voluntary approval with it. So there is a quality and methodology document published which outlines how the different pillars of the Code of Practice are supported, and also for transparency purposes, all the code that's been used in order to create a better UK equivalent is on GitHub. And this data source was put into the list of voluntary adopters in November last year. And then, in terms of more details, this is a snippet from the quality and methodology document as to how it was portrayed, how it was shown publicly that the code of practice is followed. Within section 5, mainly of the quality and methodology, there is a lot of detail that shows directly how the data aligns with the code of practice. And what frameworks were used in order to check the quality, such as the quality assurance for administrative data and the GSS Quality Center. So I think this is all I'm going to say about that. It's really a whistle-stop tour, and because I have another section to cover as well. But just to give you an idea of how this has been really useful in terms of taking something designed by on a global scale and making sure that it's of good quality for UK purposes and aligning with the code. I don't know if I've missed anything important. Jeremy, if you're on the call, I don't know if you want to add anything. Jeremy's from the Data Science Campus, so he may know a bit more about this.
No, that was great. Can pick up any questions, but do keep going. Okay,
great. Yeah, so we actually have potentially another data gap we're trying to fill in within Go2, I think it was, which may also be put through the voluntary application scheme. So we may have another one coming to you soon, but that's still in progress. So the other thing I want to talk about is this project to develop a protocol for assessment of non-official sources. So it is something developed by the Sustainable Development the Goals Data team, which I'm part of, to assist with data sourcing. And this is a project which it's quite a big and ambitious project, which was started a while ago before I joined the team. And so I've kind of taken over it and trying to, it was paused for a while due to other priorities, but now we're really trying to finalize it. So the idea is, because as I told you, there are loads of indicators that we need to fill in, over 200 of them. And ideally, we try to report data from official sources and official or national statistics. But this is not always possible, especially when we go into specific disaggregations and things that are not necessarily data collected by official surveys, because it covers a lot of areas, outside of economic context. There's a lot about environment and very specific areas of society. So it's very difficult to find official sources for all of this. It's virtually impossible. So we need to resolve to non-official sources. And I mean non-official sources, not necessarily non-official statistics, because they can be from an official source. I'm talking beyond statistical classification, sources such as data from charities, citizen-generated science, and so on. And we don't really have a formal system to help us assess the quality of that. So this is what this project is about. To try and use the code to help with assessing the quality of data coming from non-official sources, so that then we can do like a triage system and decide, okay, so this source is good enough in order to use it on the platform and show the progress of the UK towards SDG reporting. So this protocol we're developing, I'll go in slightly a bit more detail, but it's still work in progress. Especially there have been some developments this week. So even the things I'll show you are slightly outdated, but the main principles still stand. It's very SDG specific, so for the Sustainable Development Goals, but it can be easily adapted for a wider purposes. And I may have even talked to some of you on the call about this already. So yeah, to touch again on the fact about the definition of non-official sources. So it's a broad definition we've adopted for our purposes. So a source that doesn't come from a UK government department, government-related body, local devolved authority, or an official international reporting body. So essentially, we're using the list of official statistics producers as listed in the Statistics and Regulation Service Act, Section 6, to give us an indication of what should and should not pass through this protocol. So, as I said, if official is not statistic is not necessarily labeled as official statistic, but comes from one of these official sources, then we don't necessarily need to pass it through this protocol. I mean, it is, of course, we do quality checks regardless, and things are, it would still be quality assured, but it can pass through the protocol, but it's not, it wouldn't be a requirement before it goes on the national reporting platform. And by international bodies which are exempt from going through this protocol, we mainly mean Eurostat and UN agencies, because they are, a lot of UN agencies such as the World Health Organization and others are under the guidance of the UN Statistics Division, and they actually have a lot of code of practices, and including guidance for non-official statistics that they adhere to. So we have decided that data coming from them relating to the SDGs has already been quality assured, and we don't need to do that again. Okay, so the more interesting bits, this is just a at a glance of the assessment flow for data sources. So the idea is that first we have a pass or fail gateway, where a source must pass all of these 3 dimensions that you see there, relating to ethics and privacy, transparency and accountability, and need. So if anything fails, then we can't use it on the platform unless something is done to mitigate the areas that it fails on. If all of these pass, then we move on to a scoring matrix with scores from 0, which is not acceptable, to 3, which is a high score. So there are a few dimensions that the source needs to be assessed against. So we have relevance, methods, coverage, timeliness, sustainability, data journey awareness, and quality assurance. So all of these dimensions are, some of them explicitly aligned with principles within the code. Some of them are more implicitly aligned with it, but we have tried to consider that. And a lot of also the government data quality guidance and many other guidance documents, we have consulted all of these in order to form the details of the scoring matrix. So after a source has been scored, the average is taken, and if it's more than 1.5, including no scores of zeros, then the source is considered suitable to use for reporting on the platform. Otherwise, it's not, and then we can either have conversations with the source contacts, or try and see if what can be done in order to improve the quality of the source. I'm not going to go into too much detail for this one, but in addition to using data, non-official data for reporting, we're also looking into assessing qualitative information such as reports or research articles that come from non-government institutions. And we are designing a similar scoring and gateway system for those as well. Those will be used not necessarily to report towards the indicators, as in they won't fill data gaps, but sources like this could be very useful to provide more context about the indicators. It's exactly the same system, it's just that the dimensions are a bit different, but again, aligned with the code where possible. And to give you an even more concrete idea of what I mean, I've given a very slightly blurry screenshots of the specific dimensions which are explicitly aligned with parts of the code. There are others as well, but we don't mention the code explicitly, so I haven't included those. So these are extracts from the quality gateway. A little caveat here, actually the wording of these has changed as of this week, following some feedback. As I said, this is still work in progress. So but in terms of which parts are aligned with the code, they are still the same, which is why I didn't update this table. But we are explicitly aligning with within the trustworthiness with T1, 4, and 6. So the assessment of a source is, as you can see from this, is meant to be done hand in hand with the code. So you can actually refer to those sections and make sure that everything is covered. But the others, just to give you an idea, within ethics and privacy, we align with T1 and T6. Transparency and accountability, we're specifically referring to T41, so it gets quite specific for some of them. And then the accessibility part, this is just for the qualitative, but the data sources also need to be openly available. To go on into the quality matrix, I told you where we have scores of 0 to 3. So this is, again, on my screen is very small. You probably don't know if you can see it, the details. Again, the wording of some of this has changed already, but just to say that we are explicitly aligning with the quality pillar in terms of Q1, 2, and 3. And there again, sometimes it goes into more specifics, as in for the relevance, it's Q11 or Q15 and so on. So yeah, that's just to give you an idea. So you need to score the source by using this matrix on the side. This is our internal scoring sheet. So you score it as 2, 1, 3, 0, and in the end it will calculate the average and whether it's a pass or a fail. And the person who's scoring it is also encouraged to put details as to why they've assigned this score on the side. So in terms of the scope, I did cover this slightly earlier, but it wouldn't cover, obviously, official and national statistics. We don't need to assess those through that. Also, anything coming from, as I said, named government-related bodies doesn't need to go through this. But any other non-official data sets need to be covered, and research papers and articles. And I think the main challenge of this has been to actually try and identify, because we can't expect that non-official sources, such as charities and NGO reports and so on, would be, we can't expect them to be fully compliant with the code. The code is for official statistics. So it's been challenging to try and identify specific parts within those pillars of the code that would be most relevant and that are particularly important for us and for the purposes of our reporting platform to have good quality data. So yeah, this is pretty much it. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but we are keen to get feedback on this. So if anyone is interested in a bit more detail, I'm happy to follow this through later and maybe even show you a draft of our document. We're hoping to publish this, so it will be publicly available on the ONS website, hopefully by the end of the summer. It's about 14-page report, which talks in detail about this. I think I'm going to stop now because I may have gone a bit over time. But thank you.
Thank you, Atanaska. I think we can all appreciate the quality and value of surface water statistics right now, and yeah, just really interesting to hear what you're doing with data from non-official sources and how you're able to sort of evaluate it and use it, and also interesting that you're tantalizing us with other examples of VA coming down the pipeline. So fantastic. We'll open it up now to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions on what we've heard so far from Tim and Atanaska? Oh, I see a hand. Alistair?
Oh, hi there. Thanks for that. It was a question for Atanaska. Yeah, really enjoyed that presentation. I was just a question around reproducibility of these non-official data sources, because obviously potentially they wouldn't have the same sort of strict controls around releases, etc., and could be subject to updates and things, which might then mean you lose track of what you originally based your analysis on. So is that something, how do you sort of handle that in your approach?
Yeah, so it's again the purpose that we need these sources for, it's very specific for our SDG context. So what we do on the platform is, we just, ideally we want a data that would be regularly updated because we report annual time series. So within the scoring matrix, I think it's the timeliness and sustainability criteria. One of the necessary things that the source needs to pass is that the data will be regularly updated in the future. Although we have left the possibility where it could be a single data point for a score of 1, which is the lowest you can pass with. Just because we've come to the conclusion that having some data is better than no data, assuming it's high quality on all the remaining criteria, of course. Yes, so we also have conversations with the non-official sources. So there needs to be, another requirement is that there needs to be metadata surrounding the data that's being produced. So, which would include, if there are any revisions or anything like that, it needs to be listed in there. And we go through an internal quality assurance on top of that every time we update the indicator. So if whoever, the team member is that's updating the indicator, if they decide that, for example, there have been revisions or changes in methodology or there is an inconsistency, then we can discontinue using the source, or there needs to be a note put on our platform to inform users. So the idea is that it's always very transparent. So I think the scoring matrix itself already allows for that, but even if it doesn't, then just our internal QA system should pick that up. But yeah, it is possible that there could be inconsistencies from one year to the next, but we should be able to capture that because the source would be reevaluated every time we need to update the data source, the data point, sorry. So yeah, hopefully things like that will be captured. But again, we haven't actually put it in practice, so that's something that we may need to tweak the dimensions if we find that something is not working right.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
I see Ed has his hand up.
Thanks, and it's actually also a question for Atanaska. I was very interested in the kind of way that you assess suitability, and if I understood it right, there are 3 kind of gateway criteria that you use, and if any of those have failed, you don't use the source. One of those criteria I think was need, and I'll just be really interested to hear how what that means and what goes into looking at need and how you form your judgments on need, because I think it might be really relevant to lots of other situations as well where we look at things like that. So I'd be just fascinated to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And need is, because it is quite important, it was put in the gateway part, which is, as I said, pass or fail. So it's not scored continuously. So basically, again, it's very specific to the SDGs because it is done for our purposes. And the need in this case would be that we have a data gap towards the specific indicator, and this source will fill it in. So the need is we need data. This indicator has a data gap. We must fill it in, and this is suitable. So that ticks, one of those boxes. Or it could be a disaggregation gap because sometimes we filled in the headline figure, but the indicator also requires, for example, disaggregation by gender, by age, by local authority. So maybe this data that we found will fill in one of those gaps. So that would make it pass the need criteria. Let me actually have a look at at the matrix itself if I missed anything. So I can actually read it out to you. The current one says the source can inform and provide insight for I'm reading from the qualitative one. So there is need for the data. Either there is a headline data gap or the data can be used towards necessary calculations. Alternatively, the proposed source is considered to be a better representative of the UK's position against the indicator, compared to something that we already have. So it's very specific to what we have or not have on the platform for our purposes. But I guess, yeah, if it needs to be used for more general purposes, that will need to be tweaked for whatever the context would be.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Atanaska.
Are there any more questions before we move on to Penny? Great. You ready, Penny?
Yeah, I was going to put my hand up, but I was struggling to work out how to do it. So before I actually go into my bit, can I I actually had something for both presentations. And one was I just wanted to point out about the way that the Data Science Campus described what they were doing in relation to the code, and I think this is a really good example for everybody to take a look at, because it's actually quite different from the way other examples of statements of compliance. And Jeremy, you can, I don't know if you want to say anything about this bit, but basically it was that you actually bedded it into your quality document. And so it's a really interesting way of drawing out how the 3 pillars were being addressed, how they're being demonstrated in the way the work was being done, and what did it mean in the context of these sort of very particular set of sort of measures and the analysis that you'd done. So it's quite a different way of doing it, but we really liked it. So that could be something for others to take a look at as well. Not least, it's great to have a statement of compliance that is just a statement in its own right, but actually bringing that language into that kind of quality statement is really powerful. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Did you want to say anything, Jeremy, about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think we found it a really helpful framework, basically, for structuring our thoughts and obviously assessing it. But kind of, you know, the pillars are just a useful way of, we found, in communicating, as well as sort of, you know, actually doing the quality assurance. It's actually also a framework that you can use to kind of communicate those results externally, and a structure behind that. So yeah, I mean, if anyone, as Atanaska said, the report's on our website, so if anyone wants to take a look, they're very welcome. We'd be really interested in people's comments and feedback.
Thank you. And I did actually have a question for Tim. Sorry, Suzanne, if I'm going to knock us out by a minute, but I just wondered with Tim, if you had any tips for anyone on the call who looking to voluntarily apply the code pillars, about how you kind of go about sharing within your team. You talked about that you saw TQV as being kind of inherent within the project life cycle and basic good practice, and reminds you of what you need to do. Is there something that you've done that helps everybody within your team really think about the pillars? Any tips that you can give?
I think the main thing was really when we adopted it, where we talked about it an awful lot as a team and what it meant for us, and then there are kind of points with which in the survey cycle process where we would come back to it, so and that keeps it in our minds. So particularly around procurement, so we're going into we're looking towards the next phase of the survey, the next round of data collection. So this is a time where we revisit our documentation, what's on the website, making sure that it's all relevant, and we'll make sure that it's top of mind with people, and that keeps it in our minds. I wouldn't say that it's a regular thing. It tends to be driven by the stage that we're at within the business. Maybe it should be a bit more regular. And I think as well, what we do try and do a bit more regularly is try and apply the code to other projects which aren't signed up to the code, because we do know that it is good practice. And what would be useful for us is kind of, I don't know whether you can sign up to it over a suite of projects, because what happens with us is that our projects happen at such pace, and signing up to the code for the Financial Lives Survey wasn't a quick process. It would be quicker now that we're more familiar with it and we know what we're doing. But I think that being able to broaden it out across a bigger suite of projects, and that comes back to us as well, knowing a lot better about what our work program is going to be.
That's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that would keep it in our mind. But it tends to be these kind of checkpoints within the survey process that we come back to it. But also, if we're communicating it, so when we publish our report and we know that we're putting it on the website, or we know that we're directing people to the website, we need to make sure that everything's remaining up to date and correct. So we'll come back to it then, but it tends to be at certain points within the project life cycle.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tim. I'm now going to share my screen. And Tim, I'm going to come back to you sometime afterwards so we can continue that conversation about the other projects. That sounds awesome. So moving now, just to this is really a refresh in thinking about quality. Just wanted to remind everybody about the quality pillar, and really this is just I'm a warm-up act for James, who's going to be following in a minute, who I'm really excited and pleased that he's been able to join our Community of Practice event today. So this is thinking about quality, and just a few bits just to remind you around the quality pillar, and I think here's our basic definition of the quality pillar: data and methods that produce assured statistics. And you've already heard mention, I think Atanaska pulled up the point really well around thinking around the purpose for the data. What is the use that you're going to be putting to data, and is it appropriate for that use? And that's at the heart of this. One aspect of the quality pillar is really thinking about intended uses. Are the data fit for that use? Are they based on appropriate methods? And making sure that the data are not materially misleading. And at the heart of the quality pillar is your professional judgment. And I think you should not be scared of that. I think that's something that we should embrace as analysts, that this is a reflection of the judgments that we need to be making around the nature of data, and actually being, bold and owning those decisions and being open about them. So this is the heart of the quality pillar. And just to remind you, the three principles, actually they were just mentioned by Atanaska in her presentation: suitable data sources, sound methods, and assured quality. And in terms of voluntary application of the code, because of course the main code, each of these principles are broken down into more detail that has to be followed for official statistics. Within a voluntary application, we're getting you to think around the heart of what are these principles about, and how can you reflect them within your practice, within information that's not being published as official statistics. And actually, I think quality is the heart of all of the work that is being done by researchers, by analysts, by people handling data. Quality is central, I think, to what you were thinking about in how you manage a lot of the work that you're doing. And so I don't think it's actually something that is probably definitely you'll not be unfamiliar with the notions that we're talking about here. But there are things that you can do in terms of voluntary application to demonstrate your commitment to quality. And how you can do that is by making sure that you are thinking about the appropriateness of the data. Just touched on that one. Thinking about the nature of the methods and seeking the best available that you can within the context that you're working, and being open about their choices. And that, I'm going to say a little bit more in a second, coming back to that, but being clear about, what is appropriate for the need that you have. And the last one is about explaining about the quality assurance and making sure the information is as robust as possible. But at this point about the appropriate and the best available methods, one of the critical things you need to be thinking about, this is not seeking perfection. It is around being fit for purpose. And that that whole point about making sure that users are not being misled, that you are thinking appropriately about the way that the data are being handled and being used to for the purposes that you have. But when you're thinking about the purpose, and we hear an awful lot of it now in terms of kind of the rapid data that there's a massive need there now for the quick turnaround of data, and there can be some concerns around are they going to be too rough and ready to be able to be used. That's all around the professional judgment that you need to be making. It's not about making excuses, but it is about being clear what is needed for this particular purpose, and what for example, the degree of uncertainty around the nature of the data. What do you need to understand around it? Are you going to be making safe judgments on the basis of the data that you have? And that's okay. It's right to be doing that, and it's about being bold and prepared to explain your choices that you need to be making. And I think the final thing is around making sure that the assurance that you've done, the work that you've done, the way that you have approached your work is explained and being open about it. And I think we've had a number of really great examples this morning where exactly that has been done. One of the things I just wanted to pull out as I sort of just having this reminder about the different aspects of the quality pillar. Within the code of practice, we do talk about the European ESS as the European Statistics Systems quality dimensions, and then these 5 on the right hand side of the slide, they're explicitly mentioned within the code of practice. You may well be very familiar with those. I more recently became aware of the Dharma quality dimensions, and I think these are really, really interesting and helpful for you. And so really pleased that James is going to be speaking in a moment. But what I think is so helpful in thinking around quality is that the Dharma quality dimensions are helping us think about the data inputs and how to frame quality. And the ESS quality dimensions are helping us think about the statistical outputs and what do we need to do to explain about quality. So these are really, really important. I encourage you to take a good look at the government data quality framework that is using the Dharma quality dimensions and the ESS dimensions. Really, really helpful for you to follow that up. And the one final thing I just want to mention before I hand over to James, who will go into the data quality framework in more detail, is just to highlight a couple of guides that you may find helpful. So the quality assurance of administrative data, or QUAD, is something that we produced within the authority a few years ago now. And I'm just showing it on this slide. There's a screenshot of an infographic that we have that is summarizing the 4 practice areas that are listed on the slide. That's a really useful tool. Look at the QUAD toolkit if you want to think more about quality assurance. It's relevant beyond administrative data. It's a really useful tool for you to use. And another guide that we've recently published, thinking about quality when producing statistics. Do check our website. I will share the slides and they'll have the links in there, but look at our guidance webpage for more information about thinking about quality when producing stats. That's me done. And right on time, Suzanne, I want you to note, gosh, that's a miracle for me. I'm now really delighted to be able to introduce you to James Tucker. Oh gosh, I'm trying to stop presenting and I'm clicking the wrong button at the same time. James and I have known each other for quite a long while, and we used to be desk buddies. And I'm so delighted that James is leading the work in the Data Quality Hub, part of Best Practice and Impact in ONS, but looking across government around quality issues. And this is a really exciting development, James. And so really looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, and can see the slides. All good, thank you.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Oh, thanks for the introduction, Penny. Yes, it seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? When we were sat next to each other in Drummond Gate. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you today about the work of the Government Data Quality Hub. So it's a relatively new initiative. We were set up around this time last year, actually. So we've been going for about a year and are starting to get sort of well established. So the Data Quality Hub does have a role in helping producers of official statistics, but today I'm going to hone in more on its remit for data quality more broadly. I'm going to cover some of the motivations behind improving data quality, how we're going about that across government, and also what support is on offer for anybody handling data, and including those who are looking to voluntarily adopt the code of practice. So I mentioned that the remit of the Government Data Quality Hub is all government data. So that can be data that's used in finance, operations, commercial. But being a statistician myself, obviously, I've got a special interest in data that's used in official statistics. And we've been very keen to make sure that our work is consistent with the code of practice and really supports the quality pillar. So I think it's no coincidence that we're using a lot of the same narrative and terminology that Penny mentioned in her presentation earlier. So first, just a little bit about defining the problem that we have with data quality across government. So why does data quality actually matter? I think it's nicely summarised in this quote from National Audit Office report back in 2019 about getting the right data in the right place at the right time, and that being fundamental for value for money in so many of the services and public information that government provide. There was also a sort of slightly more damning sort of slant on this from a recent parliamentary inquiry that described data quality as being a significant driver of service failure. So, I mean, most of you will be familiar with this this saying. So, the issue is if you put rubbish in, you can do all sorts of sophisticated analysis and methods, but you will ultimately end up with rubbish out. So then, looking a little bit about what we mean by culture, you'll have noticed that the title of my presentation was Towards a Data Quality Culture. So this is the best definition I could find, a set of shared values, goals and attitudes and practices that characterise an organisation. I've tended to find that the word culture change is often used quite often, and it can often be sort of used when a problem almost seems too difficult to solve. So, you know, if it's difficult to pin down what actually needs to be done, it's tempting to say we need a culture change. So I think when it comes to looking at culture and data quality, we really have to pin down what that actually means and how it relates to the subject that we're dealing with. So these 5 points here, I think sort of summarise what all the contributing factors to some of the problems with the data quality culture in government at the moment. I think the reason for the first the priority, data quality is not always seen as a priority. That's first on the list, because without strong leadership about it in this, then however much will and expertise there are in the organisation, if it's not prioritised, then we won't see improvements. I think sort of flowing on from that, we see a range of symptoms, including a tendency to tolerate and work around poor quality data. So you could liken that to putting a sort of elastoplast fix on data quality problems rather than really understanding what the root cause of the problem is and fixing it there. And also you get things like the quality of data not always being well understood. So in some senses, unknown quality can actually be worse than poor quality because you're unable to assess whether that data is fit for a particular purpose. Then common to many things that go across departments, we do see an inconsistent approach and lack of knowledge sharing across departments. So that sort of hinders sharing of good practice and sort of sharing of expertise as well. I think against the background against which all this is happening is we're seeing an absolute explosion in the volume and sources of data, so-called data revolution. So this in itself throws up all sorts of new data quality challenges that perhaps we're not familiar with. So going on to some of the work we've been doing to help improve this. So the first main product for the Data Quality Hub was a government data quality framework. You'll see there the strapline is towards a data quality culture. So the idea behind this was really to set the stage for enabling improvements across departments, to get people on the same page about what needed to be done, using the same terminology and ways of conceptualizing quality. So what we didn't want this to be was something that provided a checklist, like a QA checklist that people could do in a tick box fashion. We wanted it really to make transformative change in the approach to data quality in government. So that's why we based it on these 5 principles, and you'll see that these relate to some of the cultural challenges that I outlined in an earlier slide. With the first one, for example, being commitment to data quality, we need organisations to commit to it, and that to come right from the top of organisations as well. And then there's other principles around understanding user needs. Penny mentioned about fitness for purpose. It's not always about having perfect quality, it's about understanding quality in the context of use. I'll come on to the data life cycle in a minute, but it's in summary, it's very important that data quality is looked at across the whole of that data life cycle, not just when it's analysed. We need to make sure we communicate data quality clearly. So that's not just to the end user of an analysis or data set. It's to other people, say in government or elsewhere, who will be using that data for other purposes. We need to be clear what it can and can't be used for. And lastly, it's about anticipating changes affecting data quality. For example, what sort of challenges are thrown up by you making more use of big data sources, or sort of web scraping techniques and things like that. So moving on to how we conceptualize data quality in the framework. As Penny mentioned, data quality is about fitness for purpose. It's not about having perfect data. It's about making sure it's suitable for the needs that it's put to. And Penny also talked a bit about data quality dimensions. In the data quality framework, we use the Dharma dimension. So Dharma, it's short for the Data Managers Association, and they're a sort of respected industry body that provides advice and support to the data community in the UK and internationally. So I think I don't see these as conflicting with the dimensions for production of statistics. It's more that these are for the input data specifically, so they're to understand the quality of the data rather than the quality of the outputs. You'll see that there's significant read across between those dimensions. So, for example, the stats ones include timeliness, accuracy, and as do the Dharma ones. I alluded to taking a whole life cycle approach to data quality. I think often because it's quite, data quality can be quite a sort of nebulous term, quite hard to define. What we've seen is that there is often unclear accountability at each stage of this data life cycle for data quality and what that actually looks like. So sometimes you can end up with data quality issues sort of being distilled throughout this life cycle until the data is used and processed. So then the onus falls on the analyst or statistician to understand and deal with these data quality issues when they could actually have been dealt with possibly earlier on. So in this slide, I outlined some of the types of problems that can arise at each stage of the data life cycle. And essentially, this is what we're using to frame all of our work in the Data Quality Hub. So really looking at each stage of this life cycle and making sure that the end-to-end process pays due attention to quality throughout. So on to how we're actually going about making this change happen. It is one thing publishing a framework, but as anybody who's published guidance or strategies knows that if you just leave it at that, then it can end up sort of sat on the corner of a website, not really achieving too much. So to help with that, we put in a bid for some funding last year to drive forward some improvements in data quality, and to our delight and, to be honest, surprise as well, we were fully funded to do that, to establish the Government Data Quality Hub in ONS. And this was alongside a selection of other data related initiatives that really marked the government's real interest in making better use of data. You'll have seen, hopefully, also that the government published a national data strategy last September. So at the moment, there's so much momentum about improving the use of data in government, and lots to capitalise on. So what are we doing in the Government Data Quality Hub? This is a bit of a summary of the types of work we're doing. So these range from more strategic pieces. So for example, the data quality framework would fall into that category. But then right through to more sort of detailed tools and guidance, and setting up ways to share good practice. We do a lot of events to enable people to share their expertise and experience in this area. And we also provide a service for bespoke advice and support. So essentially anyone using data and who wants advice or support on data quality can get in touch with us, and we'll do our best to help. Our sort of philosophy is really all about knowledge transfer and building capability. So with the work we do with departments, it's less about going in and doing the hands-on sort of fixing of the data, but more about providing the tools, techniques and expertise so that people can build that capability in their own area. So we've got plenty of things in development, and since the framework, we've developed an e-learning tool to support that. It's currently a sort of beta phase, but we'll happily share that with anyone who's interested. And a couple of weeks ago, we published a shorter piece of guidance on quality assurance of data in urgent circumstances. So as you can imagine, particularly with the COVID crisis, there isn't always time to do the full sort of rigorous quality assurance that you might like. So I think if anyone's interested in data quality and on making improvements, please do get in touch with us. Finally, one of the big products that we're working on at the moment is a data maturity model for government, and that is more far-reaching than data quality. It encompasses all aspects of data management, so including data ethics, so data architecture and systems. And we're working on this with the newly formed Central Digital and Data Office, if I got that the right way around, that's based in Cabinet Office. So the idea behind this is to provide a framework for departments and teams to understand where they're at in data capability and where they want to get to. So you can imagine that a department might be at an acceptable level and they want to aspire to a higher level of maturity to be an exemplar. So this will provide a way to do that, and it's currently we're looking to really pick up the pace on the development of this and start piloting with departments very soon. So that's a summary from me. I hope you can see how this work could support voluntary application of the Code of Practice for Statistics. As I said, I'm a statistician myself, so I'm really keen that it does so. And we've had some really helpful conversations with Ed and Penny and the team about how we could really use this to support that quality pillar in particular. So thanks very much for having me along, and I'm really happy to take any questions as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Penny, and thanks, James. Does anyone have any immediate questions following that interesting presentations?
I don't have a question per se. I just more of a comment and just thank you really, both of you, for the presentations. I found them really useful, and I think both of you emphasized something which I'm going to reiterate about the fitness for purpose. I think that's really important, and it's something that has helped us a lot in our framework for the quality of non-official sources. So yeah, that's really useful to consider. And then for the Data Quality Hub, I think it's a great resource, and I've certainly recently approached them for advice on our project as well. So I think it's a really good initiative. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. So yeah, thank you.
That's kind of you to say. Thanks.
Brilliant. Well, any further questions, comments, observations before we pass over to Ed to close the session?
Just a quick one from me again. Thanks a lot for that, James. Really interesting stuff. A question about the data ethics that you mentioned at the end there. That's a really interesting and very much a kind of live topic. Have you got more? Is that kind of work in progress? Excuse me. That you're doing things.
Yeah. So
that?
that is a work in progress. So for I mean, the way we're coming at the data maturity model from the Data Quality Hub is with our expertise on quality, but we're working with various policy leads across government on things like data ethics and open data on those particular pillars of the maturity model. So so we're bringing in the expertise on that, and obviously, there's a data ethics team in ONS and a committee for statistics as well. So we're going to be factoring all that in. We're hoping to have a sort of prototype maturity framework in the near future. So it's worth keeping an eye out for that.
Great, thank you.
Christine's asked what the data maturity model is. So the maturity, this concept of maturity, it's quite, I'd say I don't know if fashionable is the right word, but maturity models are quite popular at the moment in terms of ways for organisations to assess their current level of capability. So, for example, you'd have a series of maturity levels and statements alongside each one that would define an organisation's level of maturity in that area. So, for example, like the sort of lowest level of maturity for data quality would be absolutely no attention paid to it. The highest level of maturity would be that it's fully embedded in systems and all staff are fully trained. That's a very, very simplified example. So the way to really think about it is not so much like an assessment where people are then kind of told they're sort of deficient in certain areas, or they're kind of put in a league table against others. It's more helping organisations to understand where they're at, where they want to get to, and how they want to get there. It's very much something that is to be used by the person completing it. I think it's secondary, really, that then by having a consistent model across government enables us to understand where the pockets of good practice and sort of needs for improvement are. Obviously, that can be useful for things like prioritisation, but first and foremost, it's for departments to understand how they're doing and where they want to get to.
Great. Final chance to ask questions. Any more for any more? No? Ed, over to you.
Thank you. And thanks to Suzanne, and thanks to everyone who's contributed today. One of the reasons that I really love these events is that it's kind of brings out such incredible variety. I don't think there's many times when you'd hear a presentation on financial inclusion and then immediately followed up by one on the mapping of kind of water environments using various kind of mapping tools. I think it shows the richness of the work that you all do, but also the kind of flexibility of the code, that the code can be a useful resource to guide research and analysis and uses of statistics in a whole range of different areas. So thank you for the work that you do and for sharing your time with us. And I really look forward to the next one of these, where I hope we can have an equally kind of eclectic range of things that you're doing with your statistics and data, and how the code is helping you. That's all I really wanted to say, Suzanne. Just thank you very much to you for pulling this together, and for everybody for this really, really varied and very interesting set of contributions. Thank you.
Oh, well, I think that, voluntary adoption just continues to grow. We continue to see it being used in lots of different ways to help organisations. And, just some of the comments today, someone said, oh, it's really kept us on our toes, reminds us what we should be doing. It's a useful framework. I think we're just seeing more and more organisations sort of adopting that attitude and using it in a really innovative and interesting way to do what they need to do in their organisations. We have just closed and judged the next VA annual award, and the winner will be announced in July. So we had another really good batch of entries in for that, which was very encouraging. And please keep in touch. Please keep an eye on our newsletter, which has all our VA updates in it. And we look forward to the next event and the next updates, which will be coming over the summer. So thank you very much, everybody.
And can I just offer out, if anybody does have any questions around VA, please do feel free to get in touch with me, and always happy to arrange a conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.